there's so few times Cro-Magnolia will even help you, and even the times that it doesn't protect your cards from field clear. Your little shroomy, swarmy cards, you have to make sure they're not going to be removed off the field. It's one of the most important parts of Swarm decks that people, Reddit, just completely misses. This is such an underrated card. I've even heard someone suggest that this card outclasses Pineclone, which is just so ridiculous. The fact Pineclone can easily turn all your little 1/1s or 0 attack guys in the field to 3/3 is just a million times better than Cro-Magnolia. What's going on, everybody? This is Fry. So today we are doing yet another tier list. Today, due to popular demand, we are doing the Kabloom class. I would like to do this again for all of the classes, one by one. I might make a tier list for heroes and for superpowers too, so details to follow. Let me know in the comment section below, if you're watching this on YouTube, which class you'd like to see me do next. And we are just going to get started with our zero cost card, Puff Shroom. This card looks weak, it looks pathetic. This is actually one of the best cards in the entire game. I am not kidding. Not only because it's amazing synergy with Pineclone, which I will get to a little bit later, which will turn everything into 3/3s as basically a zero cost 3/3 if combined with Pineclone. It does work with Astro Shroom, which I'm going to get to in a second, which will do damage every single time you play any minion on the field. This just has so much synergy. Anything that buffs your minions is going to synergize with the Puff Shroom. Just the fact you have a free guy to play makes you able to get instant value out of a card like Mushroom Grotto. You're able, any card that really needs to be covered in order to be activated, like Ice Spore, for example, the Puff Shroom can cover it even if it's, on the turn of that card's cost. There's another part of Puff Shroom, though, that I feel like people really underappreciate, and that is this can just be stuck for free in front of any of your cards, and this will basically protect that card from damage this turn since it's a team-up. The minion opposing, unless they remove it with a trick, if they try to remove it with a minion, it'll make your guy survive. Your guy really does 1 extra damage also, and it'll kill the opposing minion without your guy taking damage at all. You can use this in aggro decks. I actually do use in several aggro decks. If you play, let's say, Haunted Pumpkin on 1, that is a 4 attack card that you can use. It's actually one of the better cards in the game. I'll get to that, of course, in the not that pumpkin, in the solar class. If you play this on 1 by itself, it does 4 damage, is amazing. If you stick a Puff Shroom in front of it, that's just a free extra damage, and now you're doing 5 per turn instead of 4. Because of how many uses this has, and it's never really bad in any deck, and it's so good with combos. It's so good with Sonic Bloom combo. It just adds an extra, like a bigger Sonic Bloom, besides for being able to do damage also during the attack phase. I know some of you are probably going to be surprised, but this is actually one of the most underrated cards in the entire game, and I think because of how underrated it is, I'm actually putting Puff Shroom in H tier. Deal with it. Absolutely deal with it. This, of course, is S tier. H is the channel meme. If you know, you know. And we're going to be moving right along to Astro Shroom. Astro Shroom is a really, really solid card, and it also has a lot of uses. Now, one mistake I see people make often with Astro Shroom is playing it on turn 1 or on turn 2, and then you can get you can get value from it. If somehow it survives on the field, it will give you more and more damage if played earlier, but the problem is it is a 1/1, and you're going to have to invest way too much into this card to make it survive, 2 or 3 damage basic removal cards. So you really, when you play your Astro Shroom, you got to make sure you're getting a lot of value from its ability. The actual turn that it's played. That's why in decks that have Astro Shroom, usually you're waiting till at least turns 4 or 5, or even 6 or 7. To play Astro Shroom, and then you combine it with a bunch of Puff Shrooms and a bunch of Shroom for 2s and all of your little minions. Usually you'll always get way more value out of it that way, instead of relying on surviving on the field for a long time. Now, this is in a really important part of a Cycle Cap deck. Cycle Cap deck is with Nightcap, where you play Astro Shroom and you try to play it into the Planet of the Grapes environment, and that way every single time you play any minion, the Astro Shroom will do 1 damage to face, but also activates this ability, which will draw you a card, then you can play more minions and more, and it's a really important part of that deck. The Bullseye is really the key. If this card did not have Bullseye, it would be a piece of garbage, because you really don't want to be poking your opponent for 1 damage and charging their block meter like that. But because of its Bullseye, it's so good. If you have several Astro Shrooms on the field, or even if you play Astro Shroom together with like Imitator, it's actually a very good card to copy Astro Shroom, a 1-cost card. Because then every minion you play is going to do 2 Bullseye instead of 1. It actually is a valid combo. I'm going to show you guys a deck. You can find it on YouTube. It'll be called the hardest deck in the game to play. It is the Dandelion King combo deck, where you see a lot of really cool use to have Astro Shroom. This is also an important part of Hyper Swarm, which again can be used as a great finisher. This is all in all a really, really solid card. I wouldn't say this is like good in every single deck, but it is a really strong and important part of a lot of decks, and that's why I'm putting Astro Shroom in A tier. Moving right along. Banana Bomb. This does 2 damage to a zombie. This is a really underrated card. Really, really strong. The fact that you don't see Banana Bomb used more is just because it exists in the exact same class as Berry Blast. And there's a lot of times where Berry Blast is going to be better than Banana Bomb. There are many times that Banana Bomb is better than Berry Blast, though. First of all, this can be used on turn 1. This can remove very important zombie cards like Interdimensional Zombie now, and Cheese Cutter, most notably. Really... a really solid control card. This removes Toxic Waste Imp, and you actually have an extra sun to play that turn. So the cheapness is how it's better than Berry Blast. The obvious disadvantage is the fact it only does 2 damage. 3 is kind of like we're going to get to Berry Blast in a minute, but 3 is sort of like the lucky number for small removal. That actually removes like 50% of the cards in the game die to 3 damage. I don't know exactly 50, but 2 damage, it's really limited to 1 and maybe some 2-drops and some glass cannons that cost more than that. This also cannot go face, so it's unable to finish off your opponent with a little bit of damage burst to face or proccing their block. This is still such a solid card, and the only reason why it's going to end up being lower in this list is really just because it exists in the same class as Berry Blast, which is the better card in general. Where do we put Banana Bomb? I actually don't have Banana Bomb in the icons here. Where is Banana Bomb? Oh, is this it? Is this Banana Bomb? Oh, I guess this is Banana Bomb. Thanks, guys. We found Banana Bomb. I guess that's Banana Bomb. It has a really weird looking icon. All right, where do we stick this? I'm going to give it solid B, just because of how... It really should be an A. It really should be an A, but because of how few decks you end up using it, and that's what we're going with these tier lists, is how useful and how many decks is it actually useful. I'm going to stick that in B tier. Feel pretty happy about that. All right, moving to the next card here. Man, such solid cards just to start off this tier list. Blooming Heart is one of the best aggro/tempo 1-drops in the entire game. A 1/2/2 is sort of standard for your tempo, but you needed to do something else, and its ability is so good. Whenever this does damage, it grows. You can protect this with team ups. You can protect it by sticking by, let's say, using cards which increase its health, like like Photosynthesizer, which increases the health by 2. But actually the best way of really protecting Blooming Heart is playing even a stronger card on turn 2. If you play Blooming Heart, this of course is part of the expensive version of Aggro Solar Flare. You can check that video out on YouTube if you want to see a great aggro deck. But if you play this on 1, then you play even a stronger minion on turn 2 that has even more attack, and then you play 1 on turn 3. If they were not able to answer this Blooming Heart on turn 1, they're going to be screwed. And there's so many heroes like Super Brains that really doesn't have a good answer to Blooming Heart on turn 1. And if they have played a zombie on turn 1, they're not going to be able to answer this because, of course, it's so cheap. It just costs one sun. Because this is such an important part of so many, really, it's an auto-include in basically any aggressive or tempo plants, Kabloom deck. I'm going to put this in A tier. It's absolutely fantastic. Moving right along. Next. Keep it going, folks. High Voltage Current, another really hard card to rank. So this card is so good, yet it falls so short when actually making the cut and including it in a deck list. Now, it used to be back in the day that High Voltage Current was, Berry decks used to be really, really good. I'm going to be getting into some of the more Berry synergy cards. This is one of the 3 Berry synergy cards in this game. that it whenever another berry does damage, this will actually grow. If you have several high voltage currents on the field, so each time any of them do damage, it grows. If you combine this with any of the very splashy berry cards, even like Sour Grapes, which will do 1 damage to every single zombie, or the Strawberrian, of course, I'll get to this a little bit later. These things can actually grow and take over games by themselves. The fact that Conjures a card also gives you another sort of synergy. You can use this together with Dino Roar as a very good activator. And you can also just get more berries for a berry synergy deck. You always seem to get a card which synergizes with it from the Conjure, which is pretty rare for Conjure cards. So here's the problem with high voltage current. Very simply, it's a 1-cost 1/1. And even if this thing grows in attack, it does not grow in health. If this grew by 1 attack and 1 health every single time a berry does damage, this would probably be a super broken. No matter how big this gets, it's always going to die to 1 damage unless somehow you buff this, which is a bad idea. The other sort of problem with this is that the first turn you play it just pings your opponent for 1, charges their block meter, does almost no damage. This isn't actually the most ideal activator for Dino Roars. Let's say like Triceratops and some of the other radishes that we're going to be seeing in this class, because again, it doesn't actually itself give you that much tempo on the field, rather than just activating the Dino Roar. Really, it just adds 1 attack to your dinosaurs, or it just activates their ability, which is pretty weak. It clogs a lane with something that's... This is why you don't actually see me use it. This is a good card, but it's also very hard to find a deck where it's really useful in, other than berry decks, which actually are not that good nowadays. Puffshroom OP, thank you Deathball for 2 months. So probably back when berry decks were better, I would give this a higher ranking, but right now I'm just going to give it a solid B. It's not bad. You can use it with Pineclone because again it'll turn into a 3/3, plus it conjures you an extra card to give you a little more sustain. Every once in a while this also just conjures you an almost unplayable card. Particularly I seem to get just a lot of Grapes of Wrath, which usually when you play a 1-cost card that conjures you a 7, you're never going to get a chance to play that Grapes of Wrath anyway. So we're going to stick that in B tier. Next, Hot Lava. Hot Lava is an almost useless environment. You can use this as the control card. The problem is it also damages your plant. So it's not, if you have like a plant versus a zombie and you play Hot Lava, it's not really going to protect your plant that much. It'll really destroy your own guys. There are some plants that benefit from getting hit again and again, like Hibernating Berry, which is the Guardian class plant, which will grow every single time it takes damage, which again is an okay combo. It's really super outclassed, actually, Hot Lava. This was added into the game much after Fireweed was added. I'll get to this in a second, but Fireweed, if you need Hot Lava in your deck and that's actually good, just run Fireweed, because this is actually still an incredible card even after the nerf. I will get to this in a little bit. Because this card is almost completely useless in almost any deck, and in the decks that it is good, it is completely outclassed by Fireweed. I'm going to stick this in F tier. It's really basically never worth running in any deck ever, except for maybe to cover your opponent's environments. This is probably the only environment I'm going to throw in F. We'll see. Moving right along. Here's Poison Mushroom. So again, this card does not have good stats. It's a 1/1/1, which if it's free and it doesn't have anything against it, it would have 3 attack. I feel like this card really should have 2 health. I think it would be like a balance card, a decent aggro card, being a 1/2 with the exact same ability of Anti-Hero 2. Of course, this means if there's no zombie in front of it, it gets 2 attack. This is still useful in some decks. In the most budget version of like aggro Solar Flare, you can find that on YouTube. This is an important inclusion because again, it's just an uncommon card, very cheap to include in your deck. This does do 3 damage for a 1-drop, which makes it fine. This is super outclassed by Haunted Pumpkin. It's outclassed by Blooming Heart for sure. Even Bonk Choi is just basically objectively better, which is a Mega Grow card, which also has 3 attack the turn you play it. The fact that when they stick something in front of it, this only does 1 damage to the minion that's stuck in front of it. So basically every minion in the game makes a good trade against Poison Shroom, makes it worse. Again, it is useful in a couple decks. I think just because I would probably put this in D tier, but because it's of its synergy with Pineclone and because of its inclusion in the budget version of Aggro Solar Flare, And the fact is okay with mushrooms. It's not that bad if you have Punishroom or Buffshroom in your deck. You know, that's a very budget deck as well. I'll stick this in C tier. I'm pretty happy with that. Moving right along. I'm going to say low C tier, though. Here's Reincarnation. So this is a card, in my opinion, which is extremely misunderstood in terms of how good it actually is. There's a certain understanding of card games you have to realize in order to understand why Reincarnation is so good. Something which is a 1-cost card. You can play it on turn 1 to remove their cheese cutters, really mitigate anything, any zombie that's played. This will at least trade with, and it can be used as a control card. That is fine. A 1/2/2 is okay. The problem with almost every single early game card, including amazing cards like Blooming Heart, is that in the late game, when you get to turns 5 and 6 and on, they're just such a burden. You never want to draw a Blooming Heart on turn 5. Almost always, you never want to do that. Now, the difference between that and Reincarnation, it has such an unpredictable ability, but usually it'll turn into something that costs more than 1, which after turn 1 is amazing. Imagine all your 1-cost cards in your deck turned into better cards in the late game. That's actually a ridiculously strong ability. People usually just think Reincarnation is just this RNG card, which is usually how I use it. I'll stick a few 4 of these in an RNG deck. But I have used this in a couple of serious decks before with this use. It's an early game control card which turns to something better later. Even at 2 or a 3, the fact that the card gets 1/1, even if this turns into a garbage plant, which there are many of those in the game, it's still good because you're still getting more value than its cost to play. This is actually a seriously amazing card. And thank you so much, Biscuit. For subs converted from a Twitch Prime to a tier 1 sub. Thank you so much for subscribing. It didn't ring for some reason. So just because I actually should use this card more often because this is seriously such a good early game control / late game card. And because it's actually one of the most fun cards in the game, I would put this in B just in terms of how many decks I use it now, but because I would actually like to include this in a lot more decks in the future. It's not easy to make synergy out of, but in terms of tempo, it's just amazing. I'm gonna, because it's also extremely fun and actually warrants to be included in more decks because of that, I'm gonna stick this in A tier. Moving right along. I love the Kabloom class, by the way, in case any of you guys didn't know. Here's Shroom for 2. This has always, since the beginning of the game, been one of the best cards in the entire game. It just simply makes 2 minions. Doesn't matter what their stats are. And it doesn't matter it's a mushroom, really. This makes 2 minions for 1. For 1 cost. That's just a ridiculous value. This will trade. So first of all, let's look at its stats before we get into its synergy here. This will trade with a 2/2, and a normal 1-cost card has 2 attack and 2 health, say it's about average, and still leaves a guy on the field with which you can grow. You can turn that into a Pineclone, etc. You can, even against a 2/3, as long as the opponent doesn't invest any more cards into that 2/3, this trades with it, because the first turn it does 2 damage, the next turn it does 1, so it trades with most 2-drop zombies in the game, which is over the course of 2 turns, which is, again, ridiculous value. Of course, this is a great combination with cards like Astroshroom because it pings the opponent twice. It works so well with Pineclones, just auto-include to be playing it there. It works very well with Mushroom Grotto because then it'll create 2 guys instead of 1. Just the fact it's 2 is so... I even heard from one of the people who used to work for Plants vs. Zombies Heroes that Shroom for 2 created so many limitations on the types of cards that they could even create for the plants, just because anything that affects multiple minions, if combined with Shroom for 2, it just becomes so good. I am going to put Shroom for 2. Oh man, I'm thinking A tier, but maybe this goes in H. Maybe this is just so... I mean, I didn't even get into how it combines with cards like Buffshroom, which isn't a great strategy, or Punishroom. Again, these are all okay. Does this go in S tier or in A is the real question. It looks like the chat is mostly voting for A. It would either be low S tier or high A tier. I do think this is a better card than... Oh man, it's similar to Blooming Heart. It's similar to Astroshroom. It's so auto-include in so many decks. Because of how versatile it is and how many uses it has and how good and how budget this card is too, that just every Kabloom budget deck, except for maybe aggro, is going to contain this. I'm going to put it in H tier. Mostly just for its synergy and some of the top Kabloom decks in the game, which are Pineclone decks. I want to point out one thing before I move on from Shroom for 2, and that is please do not use this as an aggro card. This does look good because, again, it does 2 damage, which is sort of par, but then it stays on the field and has 2 minions, and eventually maybe you can grow it. It's actually not a good idea, because if they remove one of these puff shrooms, one of the shrooms, namely, you usually want to remove the one with team up since it's better. You're left with a 1/1 that's pinging your opponent's block meter, which is really, really not good in aggro. So unless you're going to maybe do something with Shroom for 2 and then play buff Shroom immediately to at least make them 2/2s, I would really suggest not using this in an aggro deck. All right, Velociraptor Hatchling. This card is not very good in most decks because of its very weak base stats. It only has 2 health. It starts off with 1 attack, which is really, you don't want to be pinging your opponent's block meter for 1, and then the next turn it's 2, and every single turn the Dino will make it grow by 1. This is very useful, specifically in the Dino Roots deck. Is the deck we actually have Starchlord in. This is a root, so it has that synergy. If you want to check out the Dino Roots deck, just search for that on YouTube. Because this does actually have, and it's very, very good, and that deck is actually very good at protecting your dinosaurs by adding health to them with Photosynthesizer. I'll actually show you guys this one deck super quick. It looks like the season just ended. Oh, look! We have exactly that card. I'll just show you the Dino Roots deck because I'll probably be referring to this in just a minute. Again, this is the one deck that I think Starshore is actually good at. You're going to be protecting your Velociraptor Hatchling with your Photosynthesizer, and you can be sticking Primal Walnuts in front of it. This is a really, really good addition in this deck, a really good one-drop. It synergizes really well with all of your card draw and your activators for your dinosaurs. Because it's not really useful, I found in almost any deck, it's kind of just has that one solid use. And it's not even that important, by the way. But every once in a while, if you can keep this thing alive, this for a 1-cost card can actually grow into a complete beast of a minion. I'm gonna give it a low, just kind of like low C tier. I think it deserves, since again, usually things I put in C tier, they're kind of just good in like one deck. They have uses, it's just not super useful. Alright, moving to Banana Launcher. Start a turn getting the Banana Bomb. This, where am I going to put this card? This card is very, very difficult to include in a lot of decks, and that's why it's going to actually warrant a much lower tier than its highest potential per se. The problem is that this doesn't actually give you any tempo on turn 2. It only will give you an extra card, which, by the way, is not even one of the greatest cards in the game. It's a nice, solid card. They give you a nice, solid B-tier card on turn 3 if you play this on turn 2. So you lose a lot of tempo. If somehow you can keep this alive, it's good. The problem is that it's very difficult to keep this alive. Teleporting in any minion that can kill this, using Rolling Stone, it dies to Weed Spray, it dies to a lot of things. It's not the easy, since it has the 3 health, it's not the easiest card to remove on turn 2. The problem is it doesn't give you a lot. Like, cards that you play on turn 2, it will usually survive turn 2, but then what does it actually do? It just gives you spent your turn 2 play, which you could have put a strong minion on the field, a lot of strong 2-drops. Instead, you played a minion with no attack power. It gives you almost no tempo, and it just draws you 1 card per turn. So if it draws that first Banana Bomb and survives to turn 3, which it won't necessarily, but let's say it does, so then why not just run Banana Bomb in your deck? To the fact that this will survive then until turn 4 is unlikely. It usually will not survive more than 1 turn, and then you could have just saved yourself a lot of time and just ran Banana Bomb. Even if it draws 2 cards, so then you have a 2-cost card that instead of being, you have to spend 2 sun, and now you basically gained 1 extra Banana Bomb in your hands instead of running actually Banana Bomb instead of Banana Launcher. It's a little bit of I think this is a very overrated card. It's fun for banana decks, which Banana Synergy is not good. We'll get more to that when we get to the Mega Grow class. It's really not a good idea to run this in almost any deck. I would almost run this in C, but I don't even know. What is the deck that Banana Launcher is even good with? The only Banana Synergy deck that it could be run with is Captain Combustible, because that's the only one that can control Banana Bomb together with the other Banana Synergy cards, Half Banana and stuff like that. Should I put it in B class just for Banana? No, it definitely doesn't deserve that. I'm actually split between C and D tier. Dino Synergy because of the card draw? Maybe. I don't run this currently in, I don't even think this is good with Dino Synergy, because again, when you played it, this would draw you the Banana Bombs immediately. Let's say this just drew you 2 Banana Bombs when played, and it was an 03. That would activate your dinosaurs. This is not necessarily going to live that turn to even activate your dinosaurs at all. I'm going to actually put this in D tier because I really think that, and it's because I think this card is super overrated. Every once in a while, you'll play against Huge Giganticus or Super Brains who just do not have an answer to Banana Launcher, and it'll take over the game because you just have so much value. Maybe I should be giving it for that reason more than D. It could be I really haven't found. It's so unreliable. It's so hard to actually pull off. Why not just... Everyone, if this would have to really draw 3 banana bombs in order to be worth running in a deck. If it doesn't run, and what percentage of the time would this draw 3? What percentage of the time? I would say less than 10%. I'm gonna put it in D tier, just to make a point. And we're going on to Berry Blast. This is just, I'm gonna stick this right in S tier. This is this is such a good card. This removes everything, all early game card, basically all early game zombies. Just kind of look at the early game zombies that cost 1, 2, or 3. Try to find one that has more than 3 health. It's almost impossible to find. You can find like, oh, here's one. You have, you know, Moonwalker, which is not a very good card. Let's just look at 3 cost cards. Okay, you got Gatekeeper. Again, it's not a very commonly played card. This will just control, for non-gravestones, just like almost everything in the game. I know there's a couple of things that make this worse, like Drone Engineer having a 4th health. The reason 4 health was important for Drone Engineer is because of Berry Blast. The reason 4 health was important for Team Mascot. And again, we're talking about easily controlling 3 cost zombie tempo zombies who are supposed to have amazing stats with a 2 cost card. It's absolutely incredible. It'll definitely remove everything on 2 cost, and it really makes cards like Flag Zombie and Gargologist on turn 2 is almost a useless play just because it's going to get Berry Blasted. This affects the Amphibious lane, so it's a really good answer to cards like Toxic Waste. And Toxic Waste would be a lot better if it weren't for Berry Blast or Banana Bomb, I would say. Because of how versatile it is, and because it's also very good at finishing off your opponent. If you need that extra 3 damage in the game, the fact this card can go face is a little bit unfair. I don't really know why they made this go face. I almost feel like that it could have just said do 3 damage to a zombie and then it would actually be useful. This is really the fact it can go face is what makes it better than Banana Bomb. It can also be used to proc the blocks. If you're setting up a big combo, let's say with a Sonic Bloom, something that will do a big burst of damage, but your opponent has that full block meter, use Berry Blast to proc the block. It's such a good use out of 2 Sun in order to set up a finish. It's just basically auto-include in every single deck. Like, if you don't have room for Berry Blast in your deck, try to make some, because it's never bad. We're going to move right along. Obviously, it's going to be an S tier. All right. Buffshroom. Ugh. This card actually is not that good. It used to be a lot better back in the day where there was a viable strategy of just like swarming a lot of mushrooms and buffing them up with Buffshrooms. This was when the block meter had 10 charges. This was like back, talking 2016, early 2017. Now the block meter has, maybe it wasn't even 2017, but now the block meter has 8 charges. Putting a lot of little guys all over the field and using Buffshroom to buff them up, it's not super reliable. You can get a lot of value, but again, this is very circumstantial because you need there to be a lot of exactly mushrooms on the field in order to get the full value out of this. Even playing, let's say on turn 2, you play Puffshroom, Buffshroom, so you get 2 2/2s on turn 2. I guess that's fine. Maybe I should be trying to use Buffshroom in more decks. It just seems to be super outclassed by Pineclone, but maybe you can run Buffshroom and Pineclone in the same deck. I'm going to try to include this in maybe some more top tier decks. I just don't see this being used at the highest level of the game. It's very hard to really justify including this in the deck, that instead of something that just more reliable, like if you didn't have a mushroom on turn 1, which the only mushroom that's really, even playing Shroom for 2 on turn 1 is not ideal. It makes Buff Shroom a lot worse. This is a decent card for budget players, but I really don't think it's that useful. I might be undervaluing it by putting it in C tier. It could be I'll actually try, now that I'm talking about this, I'll try to actually find some more decks where Buff Shroom is just like a super solid card. But again, on the highest level of the game, for budget players, it would be higher, but on the highest level of the game, this is really kind of have no business running Buff Shroom in any deck, and we're going to put that in C tier. Moving on to Fireweed. This is such a good card. Please, okay, guys, here's the history of Fireweed. Fireweed used to be a 2-cost 3/3 when played in the ground, make a hot lava here, which again is the environment that does 1 damage to both plants and zombies every single turn. When this had 3 health, this was S tier. This was going to be easy S tier when it had 3 health, because being able to play a 2-cost 3/3 was just ridiculous tempo. It was so hard to control, put you so far ahead just in terms of its stats, and that's even without its ability. Let's not talk about what Fireweed used to be. Let's talk about what it is right now, and this is still an incredible card. First of all, a 2-cost 3/2 plant, which that's what this always is. A 2-cost 3/2 plant is fine. Even Fire Pea and Applesaucer on turn 2, which are both 2-cost 3/2s, is good. It's not super easy to control. It does a lot of damage. It does not die to Rolling Stone. Doesn't die to Weed Spray the next turn. It's a fine aggro card. 3 is par. Just a 2-cost 3/2 is not great, but this ability makes this card into a great card. When this plays on the ground, you can essentially control a 5 health minion with this card, because it does 3 damage. The hot lava will do 1 damage this turn, the Fireweed blocks it this turn, and the next turn it'll do 1 more damage to get it to 5. This can control just anything they play on turn 2. Usually this can control anything they play on turn 3 or turn 4. And even if something has like 6 health, like they played freaking on turn 4, they went Parasol that has 6 health. This will still eventually, you just wait 1 more turn and that thing is going to die to the hot lava. This is an absolutely incredible card, even after the nerf. A lot of people are asking me, Fry, should I run this in aggro decks? Even after the nerf, now it only has 2 health. The answer is absolutely yes. There's another thing about Fireweed which makes it so good. Besides for itself, its own ability of creating the hot lava, you can play this into your opponent's environments, and you don't have to run environments now. Just compare this to Spikeweed Sector that does 2 damage every single turn. This does so much more the first turn, and eventually instead of doing 2, it'll only do 1. I know the hot lava can again affect the next minion you put into that lane, but you can play around that lane if you want. You always have that choice. This is such a good, I almost want to put this in S tier still, just because in plant decks, you got to run a few environments just to counter dangerous zombie environments. This allows you to put a card that is a nice solid tempo card and also covers their environments. This is such a good, I almost want to put this in S tier. I would have when it was a 3/3, as you can see the icon still says 3/3. I'm going to stick this in A tier just because I'd say it's not, man, which deck really, there's better environments to run. I think Spikeweed Sector is still overall the better environment. It's really tough though. This is arguably better than Spikeweed Sector because you can play it on turn 2. Spikeweed Sector, if they didn't play anything on turn 2, you pass turn 2 and you save it. I'm going to put this in very high A tier. I would have put this easily in S when it was a 3/3. That was a broken. I'm really happy it got nerfed because this, as a 3/3, is just way too good. I think they kind of forgot that you can play it on heights anytime you want and have a 2-cost 3/3. By the way, this card is a good control card as I described. It's a decent tempo card because, again, it removes an opponent's environment plus puts the 3/2 on the field. And it's also a good aggro card because it'd be played on heights. Where do we put you? Is it the same as these? No, it's actually more useful than the cards in A. It's probably just as useful as these cards. Not quite as Berry Blast, but it's more than Shroom for 2. I'm putting this in S tier. Screw it. Let's go. Alright. Here's the problem. This card is such rubbish. This is such a bad card. I'm going to tell you, there's like 5 reasons why this card is so freaking bad. First of all, the amount of just Guys, look at the tier list here. Look at the Kabloom class. The cards that cost 0 through 3. The cards that cost 0 through 3 go to here. Half the class is 0 through 3. Less than half the class costs 4 or more. Even 0 costs through 2 is like a third of the cards in the game. This will turn into, if this turns to a 2-cost card, it was a bad deal because you didn't get the 2-cost card that turn. And this can be, okay, so that's the first problem, is that the actual pool of cards this turns into is garbage. You actually have to eliminate everything that costs 6 or more. So you kind of just like get rid of all of these. It's the cards this turns into are bad, and very often whatever it will even turn into will not have any synergy. It won't actually help you in your deck. Second of all, this thing only has 1 health, which means it's a 2-cost card that gets removed by any 1-cost control card. It doesn't matter if it's Rolling Stone. It could be the 2-cost Beam Me Up. We'll put a 2/3 on the field and remove this for free, essentially, that turn. It dies to Bungee Plumber. It dies to Nibble, which is a bad card but still controls Seedling. Someone's yelling in the chat, Astro Shroom Synergy, because this creates 2 guys. This really has no place in any deck in the game. This is such a bad card. Now, the way I would fix Seedling would either always has to, it maybe like instead of this ability transform to random plants 6 or less, it should be 3 or more. I feel like that maybe would make it good. I feel like it would still be bad because it has 1 health. So really giving this 3 health, I think, would be the sort of the lucky number. 3 health, and it has to turn to a guy that at least costs 2. Maybe that would be a good compromise. I think that would be a decent card. But the fact, again, when you play this usually dies for free, and very often they'll just teleport into 1-drop or play a Beam Me Up or something, which removes us off the field at no cost, doesn't do any damage. It's pretty cool when it's when it attacks, though. There's a little Easter egg in its attack animation if you add some attack to this. Because this card is utterly and completely useless and has basically, I mean, it's fun. I'm going to put it in D tier just for being a fun card, a card that's had a lot of highlights. We even have a video where this turned into a trick-or-treater because the game decided that trick-or-treater was a plant. I'm going to put it in D tier. Sorry, guys. It's a piece of trash garbage. This is not a good card at all. Stop running Seedling, guys. Plus, it can turn to another Seedling. OP. I would actually have put Seedling in F tier if it weren't for the fact that it's a fun card. That'll bump it up at most 1 tier for me. It really strategically, again, does not belong in any deck ever. Move into the next one. We got Shelf Shroom. This card actually got nerfed in the attempt to nerf berry decks. They actually nerfed berry decks in 2 stages. It used to be a 2/3, now it turned into 2/2. This is not a good card. Even in berry decks, even when I used to run berry decks, this is just not worth it. This is essentially a Banana Bomb. A really expensive Banana Bomb. It does 2 damage to a guy. This can be played as a 2/2/2, which is a horrible minion, so you don't want to do that. You don't want to stick another guy on top of it, because then you can just run Banana Bomb and do 2 damage. The berry synergy does not help. I mean, yeah, if you have Sergeant Strongberry on the field, this will do 4 damage now, but it's just too expensive. Just run Berry Blast. It's so much better. This card really doesn't belong in basically any deck ever. And that's why I'm going to put this in F tier. A piece of trash garbage. Discounted Berry Blast, exactly. All right, here's Wild Berry. This is a decent card for like budget aggro decks. It's a 2-cost card that does 4, which is ridiculous. This looks better than it is, and its ability is actually the reason why it's really, really bad. The fact this moves to a random lane makes it a bad aggro card. The essential thing with a lot of aggro, which means you're trying to do a lot of damage to your opponent's face as short as possible, is lane management. You always want to be sticking a card that does 4 damage into an empty lane. The fact that if they have 2 minions in lanes and you can't stick this in the 3rd one because it'll go to maybe to one of, you know, it has a chance always of ending up in a lane with a zombie in it already. Plus, there's a lot of cards in the game that make this useless. The 1 health makes it way too easy to remove. There's also cards like like the black hole environment in the Beastie class, which is a pretty common environment. This makes it completely unplayable, because if you play it in here, it dies before it moves, and if it ends up here, it just dies immediately. Trapper Territory is the same thing. It does 1 damage to it. It's actually just not a reliable card. Now, this is a good addition if you don't have your Fireweeds. This is a good 2-drop to be running in aggro decks nonetheless, because again, its stats are, it has 4 attack for a 2-drop, so if they don't remove it, this is a really, really heavy hitter. It's not even that good to run in berry decks. I'm gonna sort of put this in the same tier as Astro Shroom. It's kind of just like, not Astro Shroom, whatever this thing called, Poison Shroom, because it's a decent aggro card, but it's just outclassed by so many things, even in its own class, and it's super unreliable. That's why I'm going to be putting in C. Keep it going. Here's Berry Angry. This card is such ass. Oh, this is so bad. Here's the problem with Berry Angry. Now, it looks like a really good Swarm Synergy card, because you've got a lot of guys in the field, and you got your Puff Shrooms going, and you got your Shroom for 2s. This is going to add a lot of attack to a lot of guys. Here's the problem with Berry Angry. First of all, if you have 1 minion on the field, this just does 2 attack. Even if you have 3 minions on the field, this is going to add 6 attacks, so 6 stats. A 3-cost 3/3 also has 6 worth of stats. You know, I mean, just in terms of the amount of, having more than 3 minions on the field and playing Berry Angry is almost impossible, because this is a 3-cost card. If this was cheaper and this cost 2, I think this would be pretty decent, because it's easier to combine with small minions. But to play a couple, even 2 small minions and play Berry Angry is already a 5-cost strat, which there's just so many better things in this game to be playing on turn 5. And again, reliably having, you know, 2 or 3 or more cards survive from turn 2 until turn 3 and then play Berry Angry is, first of all, not reliable, and second of all, not that good. One thing you really need to do in your Swarm decks is, I'm going to get to this a little bit later when we talk about Pineclone and Cro-Magnolia. One thing your Swarm decks need to do is protect your guys from field clear. A deck with a lot of little minions in it, if they just have a chickening or just an extinction event, environments that will do damage to our lane, you just don't want them wiping your guys clean easily. And just increasing merely the attack of your Shroom for 2, let's say, instead of just their health, is not a good idea, because again, it just dies that same, you know, chickening. Of course, this does protect things from Weed Spray, which, by the way, is not a very good card nowadays. It's not actually played in a lot of decks. It has a lot of weaknesses. Really not a very commonly card played. I don't think that Berry Angry really deserves to be in basically any top tier deck ever. Even in bottom tier decks, it has almost no use. I'm going to put this in F tier and keep it out of ew, please delete, because every once in a while you see this card be amazing. Every once in a while I'll conjure this from something, and it'll actually just add just enough to to push you through the lethal. So I'm not going to say it's like a card that you never even want to conjure either. Usually you don't want to conjure. I would almost put this in delete tier, but I'll just stick it in F just because every once in a while it's pretty fun. But anyway. Did I make a good Berry Angry deck that went 10-0? You're right. I made one good Berry Angry, but you know what? To be honest, I don't think in that Berry Angry deck, Berry Angry was a very important part of it. We had some good use out of it. There's going to be better cards of Berry Angry. You're right. I did make one Berry Angry deck that went 10-0. So maybe just for that, we'll go in D tier. Screw it. Next. Cosmic Mushroom. This is not one of the good cosmic cards, because again, 3-cost 2/2, it just puts you so far behind, and the extra 2 attack that your mushroom that you conjure will gain, it really does not make up for this. Like, imagine you had a 3-cost 4/2. I guess that's an okay card. Zapricot, for example, is an okay aggro card, but the only reason Zapricot's a good aggro card is because you get that extra 2 attack that turn already. Yeah, if you get a Puff Shroom from this every time, this card would be made. If this made a Puff Shroom that was a 3/1, this would be one of the best cards in the game. But very often, you're just going to get a card that's just so hard to play. You'll get a Shelf Shroom, or you get a, I don't know. It's just too slow. It's too unreliable. There's too many bad mushrooms in the game. And again, the turn 3 is such an important tempo turn. What the zombies could do to you on turn 3 when you play Cosmic Mushroom is just going to make you just die. It's just almost, again, one of these cards that has no business being in any deck ever. Its ability is just too unreliable, not good enough, and it's just too slow is the problem. I'm gonna put this in F tier. I don't think it's a good card. I think like if Astroshin was a 3-2, I think it would be worth it. Because then at least you can use it as like an aggro card that will give you a better aggro play the next turn. 2-2 is just too weak. All right, here's Cro-Magnolia. Oh my gosh. Guys, this is not a good card. This is a horrible card. You have to just think, besides for being completely outclassed by Pineclone, you have to think, what is the situation where Cro-Magnolia is worth it? So, plants here next door get +2. This is a plant evolution. So first of all, if it's played by itself, a 3-cost 2/4 is garbage. You never want to have that. So this is only going to be good circumstantially if you have a good card to cover. Let's say you cover a 1/1, like a Puff Shroom or a Shroom for 2, with the Cro-Magnolia. So you delete 1/1 from its stats and you add +2 attack. So really, it's like a 3-cost 3/3, which is like a vanilla, which is like, okay, fine. You would need to have like two other cards besides for the card that you're covering. You need to have 2 other cards on the field, and they also have to be close because it's only plants here next door. It's not like it affects all 5 lanes, which maybe would be the way to redeem this card and actually may buff it and make it better. But it's so there's so few times Cro-Magnolia will even help you, and even the times that it doesn't protect your cards from field clear. Your little shroomy, swarmy cards, you have to make sure they're not going to be removed off the field. It's one of the most important parts of swarm decks that people Reddit just completely misses. This is such an underrated card. I've even heard someone suggest that this card outclasses Pineclone, which is just so ridiculous. The fact Pineclone can easily turn all your little 1/1s or 0 attack guys in the field to 3/3 is just a million times better than Cro-Magnolia. This is so circumstantial. Again, if you just Pineclone, if you have 1 other minion on the field, this is still good. You get 2/3. You basically get a 3/3 plus a 2/2 buff. That's fine. If this you have one minion on the field, it's garbage. It just takes away that minion and gives you something that's not even that good. A 3/4/4 is fine, but not if it had Plant Evolution. I think if this card did not have Plant Evolution, it was really just like Steel Magnolia, that it would just buff plants here and next door by 2. I think that would also make this a lot better and a lot more useful, but because it really has hardly any... There's a couple decks where this is fine. I've tried this before. It's always such outclassed by Pineclone, which is going to give it a lower tier. I really don't think this is a good card. I think people who think this is a great idea... Your deck's gonna die to field clear 100% of the time if you're trying to set up a Cro-Magnolia, because of how unreliable it is and how outclassed this card is. Extremely outclassed by Pineclone. I'm sticking this in D tier. This really, even on budget decks, it's not a good idea. Keep it, delete it for being overrated. It's fine. I'm not gonna say it's that bad. Nice solid D tier card. All right, here's Sad Boy Imitator. This is actually, this is a hard card to rate. This is actually one of my favorite cards to play in the game because being able to duplicate things has crazy, crazy combos. Now, the day I'm actually uploading, I'm actually recording this video on June 2nd, 2020. Today I have rendering in the background a deck where I use Imitator to copy Dandelion King, which will end up doing 15 damage. First one does 10, now they have 10, so the second one does 5. You can use this to copy Astroshin, which will actually have some really cool combos. You can look up that deck if you're watching this on YouTube. It'll probably be called the hardest deck to play in the game. Special appearance by Baby Fry, or it's called the Dandelion King Miracle deck. So you can use Sad Boy to copy your Astroshin, which I explained before, copy your Dandelion Kings. You can use it to copy even like cards like Sonic Bloom and create 2 Sonic Blooms. You can really use it in other decks too with like other classes to make like 2 Bananasaurus Rex on turn 4. It gives you a lot of like bad tempo on turn 3 when it's played. You can play this with Starchlord on turn 4 and get 2 Starchlord. No guys, it's not a good idea. Guys, don't do it. So it gives you very bad tempo. The thing is about Imitator is that it does not die easily. There's almost no zombie cards that remove a 1/4 except for Rolling Stone and Weed Spray. That's the problem every 1 or 2 attack. Plant card are going to have. So you got to play around those Rolling Stone, Weed Spray. But if you're not against the hardy class and you have a good 4-drop in your hand, again, it is very reliant that you have a good play the next turn, like a 4-drop. This really just gives you an extra 4-drop on the field. and copy Seedling with it. This is a super, super hard card to rate. I think it's actually very useful in a lot of decks, but certainly not like a top tier card. I'm going to give this a solid B. I can't wait to show you guys. I'm still catching up to the sort of month of, I think it was in April where I made a lot of really fun decks with Imitator, and I can't wait to show you guys that. Just stay tuned on Frame Up Gaming. I'll be trying to upload a lot of the Imitator decks where you'll see it's really good with just like Pod Fighter. There's just so many really cool combos. This maybe is even a cost. No, this is a solid B. Really like it. All right, next, Invasive Species. So if playing in an environment, this card is ridiculously OP. 3 cost 5/4. Are you kidding me? I mean, if this worked on Heights, this would be one of the best aggro cards seriously in the entire game. The problem is it only works in an environment. And the problem with this as a plant, like I think as a zombie, this would even be better. But the problem is it's a plant. You can't reliably play a plant environment on turn 2. The only time it's good to play a plant environment on turn 2 is if the zombie has either played a minion on turn 2 that will die, like you can play Spikeweed Sector on turn 2, or if the zombie has played an environment on turn 2, like, well, no, it doesn't even work if they played an environment on turn 2 because you can't cover their environment. The zombies have last say on turn 2 with their environments. That's a really important part of why Invasive Species is not. Is because you can't play your environments on 2 because the zombies will just cover it with their environment and you lose a whole card for free. So since it's unreliable to ever play environments on turn 2, Invasive Species really is a 3/2/4 most of the time. Every once in a while you have an environment, but again, later in the game, having a 3 cost 5/4 that only works in certain lanes, that only works in environments, it's just super unreliable. This is a card you hardly ever will see in any deck. I've really tried to make Invasive Species decks where you set up an environment, then you try to double this attack and use bonus attacks. I don't know, Captain Combustible. It's too unreliable, and for that reason I'm putting this in. I'll put it in D. It's probably about the same usefulness as Seedling and Banana Launcher and Crow Magnolia. All right. Here's Mushroom Grotto. This is a card that actually has had a lot of stat changes. Well, there's one specific stat change. It used to cost 2. This card cost 2. It was so good. Pineclone decks, Pineclone Molecule decks, when Mushroom Grotto cost 2, were way too good. It was just too efficient to put tons of little Puffshrooms all over the field. And then to Pineclone them, and just, it was, that was one of the first decks we made when Mushroom Grotto came out. You can find that from like tier 2. I think it was called our first OP set 2 deck. Is this from Galactic? Yeah, so it was like the first OP Galactic deck. You can find that from like, I don't know, 2017. Now that it costs 3, this is a balanced card. I like it at 3. It's not super useful because, again, plant environments are in general less useful than zombie environments because they can get covered the turn that they're played. This is a setup. You don't get any value from this the turn it's played, so don't run this in random decks because it's actually a really, really bad card. And usually, even if it does somehow survive turn 3 and doesn't get covered by one of your opponent's environments, on turn 4 it will certainly get covered, and you're really just going to get a 1/1, or maybe if you put a team up in here, you'll get 2 1/1s worth of value out of Mushroom Grotto, which is not good. So in most decks, this is really, really garbage, and please don't run this except unless it's the right deck. Now, the right deck to run this with is if you go, let's say, I'm playing it on turn 3 or turn 4, and a Pineclone deck is super good because you play this on turn 3. You have to make sure that the opponent is not going to cover it on turn 3. So if they invest a 2 or 3 cost zombie and they're not going to be able to cover this, play this on 3, and then on turn 4, you have Puffshroom, which will create 1 Puffshroom. It'll create another guy, another mushroom, and then you can play Pineclone into this environment. It just creates like a lot of Pineclones, particularly playing this on turn 4, and then on turn 5 playing a shroom for 2 in this, and then playing Pineclone. Basically, will just cover your entire field with Pineclones. It is viable in that sort of deck. One trick I want to tell you guys, just a game mechanic with Mushroom Grotto, is make sure you're always playing this in the most left lane, in lane 2. That way, when you play your Pineclones, if this has minions to it to the right of it that are turning into Pineclones, then the new Mushroom Grotto, like when your Pineclones, you have like these 2 little mushrooms in the Mushroom Grotto that transform the Pineclones, and those will make Puffshrooms. If there's minions to the right of the Mushroom Grotto, those 2 new Puffshrooms will actually turn into Pineclones, since Pineclones turn they transform from left to right. So the ones in lane 2 will transform, then they'll trigger the mushroom growl, create the mushrooms, and then the Pineclone lane 4 will actually transform those 2 mushrooms into a Pineclone. If this is played all the way in the right lane, it actually happens less often. If you know, you know. I'm not going to over-explain that. Again, you can see this is a 2-cost card. It used to cost 2, which was a little bit too OP, and it was a lot better value, obviously, for 2. You know, investing 3 and getting a few mushrooms, not very good. Because this is an almost completely useless card in almost every Kabloom deck, and it's really only good in 1, it's really not even that necessary in Pineclone decks. I'm going to put this like solid C tier. It's fine. Oh gosh. This is such an honor. Guys, if you have one other minion on the field, this is a 3-cost 2/1. If you have 2 minions that survive on the field until the next turn, this is a 3-cost 4/1. Horrible glass cannon. 3 minions, now it's like a 6/1. Now you can even start talking, but even a 3-cost 6/1 is not that good. And the reason is because it's controlled by everything. I mean, just Bungee Plumber, just it doesn't matter. Black Hole, Nibble. It's just so this is such a flawed card. We have like a meme where you try to go OTK Mushroom Leader, where you have a bunch of mushrooms. You play this and try to do bonus attacks, but it's too expensive. I think that's a 2-cost card. You'd be able to actually make better combos with this, but it's just 3 cost, and you also need other minions to play, so you're spending a bunch of sun on those. Plus now you need to do bonus attacks. You're not going to ever have enough sun. It's so trash. Alright, this is the first one putting delete here. There's no need for this card to exist. If this had like, I don't know, if this had 3 health, I think this would be, even 2 health would be a little weak. Maybe at 2 health it would be fine. I think at 3 health, this would be like a nice solid C or B card. Maybe then it'll actually have some reliable combos. I'm putting on delete here. Oh, here's a nice gem. This is Poison Ivy. This is obviously a super aggro card. You want to play this on turn 3 in a dry lane, and it does 5, which is one of the most powerful turn 3 plays. It is a plant, so again, your zombies, it's hard to control as 3 health, which is not a whole lot of zombie cards. A lot of times they're going to need to use like a Rocket Science or a big removal card remove, which is great. If they're using a Rocket Science in your 3 drop, it just makes your plays better later, a lot better. It's very, very hard to counter. Now, the real counter to this is sticking a minion in front of this the next turn. That's why I usually like to combine Poison Ivy with cards that can transform it. So you can turn into a Pineclone the next turn, which is 3/3. That's a solid strategy. The best deck for this, of course, is Aggro Solar Flare, where you play Poison Ivy on 3, then they stick a card in front of it, now it's a 1/3. And on turn 4, you come in with the almighty Elderberry, which is just a great target. Now you have a 5/4, which will usually survive whatever they stuck in front of it, and it's doing strike through, so there's no problem with it being contested by a minion. This is such an auto-include in really almost any Kabloom aggro deck. This is not good tempo card, so don't even try it. It's way too expensive. And again, it really doesn't make good trades. This is only good in random lanes, because this is such a good card in a couple of decks, but kind of sucks in, this is going to be A or B. I think Blooming Heart is actually a better card than Poison Ivy because it's more useful in tempo. This is not useful in tempo. It's only good in aggro. It's really only good in one very specific type of deck, but it's very, very good in that deck. I'm going to give it a solid B+. I think it's a good place for this. All right, keep on going. We're going to say high B tier for Poison Ivy. It is a good card. It's also a berry. It's not really useful in berry decks. B+. All right. Here is Punishroom. Oh, I gotta get a move on here. I have a doctor's appointment right after this tier list. You could probably notice one of my eyes. I have like a little eye infection, but nothing to worry. I'm feeling just fine. Here we go. Here is Punishroom. So, back in the days where I used to run a lot of mushroom decks, which again was before I reached the highest level of the game, like actually competing with like on the top tier. This was a good card. You play your shroom for 2-on-1, play your buff shroom. Punishroom can get a lot of value. Imp decks used to be a lot better, where you swarm with a lot of imps and toxic waste imp. Now, since Banana Bomb got invented, which again, this is the premium set, Banana Bomb came a couple sets after, which is another answer to Galactic. It came one set after. It doesn't seem like on the highest level of the game, Mushroom Swarm decks are good. I do want to bring this back. We did go 10-0. Remember the 10-0 without Briar Rose challenge? You can find that on the Fry 'em Up channel, I think we ran a Mushroom Storm deck. I'm pretty sure we ran Punisher. It's just unreliable because, again, usually putting your mushrooms on the field earlier is not good. You want to save them for later and play them together with Pineclone. They're usually much better value from it. If you are going Mushroom Storm, this is a good addition. This can also, the problem with Punisher is it just gets removed very easily. I mean, the fact it dies to a Bungee Plumber, it does have a little bit of an effect because then it'll still at least do 2 damage. But if your opponent removes a Bungee Plumber, this is basically like a Banana Bomb plus cost your opponent a removal card. I haven't found this card to be super useful, but again, it's sort of like the same as Buffroom of a card which I maybe would like to try more. And really, I haven't done Mushroom decks a lot. I'm going to put this in a solid C tier since it's probably not on like the highest level of the game, but I think for lower level players, this used to actually be a rare and they turned into super rare during the rarity changes, the rarity pandemic. I'll give that just a solid C tier. All right. Here's Strawberry. Now, this is a card that has gotten nerfed almost into uselessness, and this was the main difference between the berry decks having been one of the best strategies in the game. It used to be, was this card. It all revolved around Strawberry. Now, back in the base set, this is Triassic. So back in the base set, before Strawberry ever came around, the only really berry synergy card was Sergeant Strongberry. It just was not enough to really justify putting a berry deck. So they said, you know, they decided, hey, let's get some berry decks going. They had Strawberry in. This used to be a 3-cost 3/3, as you can see the little icon over here. And this also, its ability, it would do, when you play a berry, do 1 damage to zombies next door to Strawberry. And this used to protect itself as well, which made it so much better doing 1 damage there. Because you just play this on turn 3, and then you play your Sergeant Strongberry on turn 4. This basically would splash 3 damage all around. And it would protect itself and live another turn, and then you'd be able to get more value out of it. So Strawberryan used to make berry decks just extremely strong by itself. Now that this has gotten nerfed, it first of all has 2 health, which makes it die to Bungee Plumber, and so many things just remove it out of the game. But also, the fact it doesn't protect itself makes this card pretty bad. Berry decks nowadays, I'm not going to say they're horrible, but they're really very far from the top tier just because they just don't really, the synergy just does not do enough. The fact is, Berry Evolution Gain and Berry Blast sometimes is useful if you need 3 direct damage to face. Usually, you're just playing your Strawberry and not on top of one of the other minions. You're just playing it dry, since you don't really want to destroy tempo on the field just to gain an extra card, typically. I would say, since this is an okay part of some Berry decks, but it's not very good, I'm going to put this in low C tier. I would say it's about the same as Punisher. Keep it going. Oh, here's a gem. I think an underrated card in this game, Velociradish Hunters. The reason this card is so good is how it's almost impossible to control on turn 3. The only thing that removes 2 1/3s on turn 3 is basically Flick, like Hand of Devastation, and Weed Spray. But against, let's say, the Crazy Class, against Professor Brainstorm, against Electric Boogaloo, this will almost always take, usually it's not controllable on turn 3, this will almost always take 2 cards to remove. This is a very good card if you, again, it just is basically 2/6 worth of stats on turn 3, which, by the way, is ridiculous. It's one of the best. That's one of the best stats in the entire game for a 3-cost card is 2/6. Plus, it grows. So if this survives to turn 4, which it almost always does, now it's going to be 4/6 worth of stats, and then 6/6. And if you play a card that conjures something or draws a card, then this is going to be it just will grow so much. It doesn't grow in its health. If it grew in its health, this would be broken wide open. But 3 health is enough. Three health plants are really enough they don't get field cleared, which is the main point. The other really good synergy card, I'm going to get to Molekale in just a second, is with Molekale, because if you play this on turn 3, this card actually makes Molekale into a viable card that, you know, Molekale usually using with Pineclone. You can use Molekale to transform these 2 cards on turn 4 into 2 4-drops. So you basically on 4, now you have 2 4-drops on the field, which is such ridiculous value. Very solid card. I'm not going to say it's an S tier quite, because it's not one of the best cards in the game. You don't need this. But even turning these into 2 Pineclones on turn 2 3/3s is great. You know, you have basically 3 3/3s on turn 4. It's really good. Nice, solid A tier card. I'm not going to quite put it in S tier, but it's super good. Low H? No, I think it's solid A. Solid A+. All right. Here is Apricot. Whew. This is a really underrated card. People ask me a lot, how come you run this in your aggro solar flare deck? Even the most expensive aggro solar flare deck, I do run 4 Apricots. 3 cost 4/2 is just perfect, exactly what you need for an aggro deck. I'm not going to say this is one of the best cards in the game. Poison Ivy is better, it does 5 instead of 4. But the fact this doesn't like get reduced in attack when it has a minion in front of it is so good, because this will always trade. This will, it's almost impossible to get a 5 health zombie in front of this effectively. This can be removed by a smaller guy, but it is a plant. If this was a zombie, this would not be a good card as a plant, since your opponent is already putting minions on the field before this, and you can just stick this in empty lane. This will do 4 damage to face and then remove whatever they can somehow play the next turn. It's actually a really underrated card, has no synergy, it's a fruit synergy. Solid member of aggro solar flare. You don't need to put it in aggro decks. There are better, let's say if you're not going solar flare, if you're going with for example, going Wall Knight instead of Apricot, you want to run Health Nut. So there are better. If you're not in Solar Flare, there's a lot of classes that have better cards than this. Do you put this in B or do you put this in C? I almost feel like this is just as good of a card as Banana Bomb or High Voltage Current. So I'm gonna put this in B. I think it's a nice solid aggro card. Certainly not putting it in A. What is Health Nut? Look it up. All right. Woo! Here's Mollical. The main use of Mollical is after you play Pineclone. Pineclone turns all your little puff shrooms and your 1-cost cards into 4-cost cards, and then you Mollical and turn them into 5-cost cards. This is so fun. Besides for being a really good strategy, I mean, some of the top tier decks in the game, if you want to look up a good deck, look up Psycho Pineclones that has a lot of like little free cards, and then Pineclones and then Mollical. This is very competitive too. It's pretty reliable. Every once in a while you get this really sad Mollical where you get a bunch of potted powerhouses that are just 3/3s and just useless 5-cost cards, but most of the 5-cost cards in the game are very, very solid. Every once in a while you'll get like a Jumping Bean, which will give you so much tempo because it bounces one of your opponents off the field. You get Body Gourds, get all kinds of good stuff from this. Allosauruses and whatnot. Again, this is very useful. Usually if you're running 4 Mollicals in the deck, you want to have also Pineclones, little guys, and you also want 4 Velocirash Hunters. Typically, if you just have Pineclone, you're not going to run quite 4 Mollicals. You only run 2 or 3 because, again, if you don't have Pineclone, this ends up being usually pretty bad. But with the Velocirash Hunters, you definitely run 4 Mollicals in the deck. Easy. There's also some really, really fun decks where you try to play expensive cards with active abilities like Dandelion King and like Kernel Corn that clear your opponent's field. And then you start playing Mollicals to leap them into a 9-cost card, which is Great Zucchini, and then a 10-cost card, Cornucopia. That's not the highest, it's not the most competitive strategy, but it is very, very fun. Combined with this being an actual very good competitive card, it synergizes with Pineclone, which is going to give it a lot of points in my book, and being super, super fun. I'm actually going to put this in S tier. And it's not, competitively, I would put it in A tier because it's not useful in a lot of decks, but because this is actually probably the most fun card in the game, maybe besides for Evolutionary Leap and Baboon Rising, I would say, it's sort of like in terms of the amount of decks you want to include this with, there's so many. You can also use this with Click P, by the way, if you want a really fun deck for Captain Combustible. Very underrated deck is called Captain Swarmy Swarm. You'll see a nice, really cool version of a Mollical deck. I'm going to put an S tier just because of how incredibly fun it is to just transform things into random things in this game. Yeah, that'll push it up to H tier for me. All right. Oh, Pair of Pairs. This is actually like an okay stat card. I feel like if this game had an arena mode, like a random draft mode, this would be okay, because again, it's a 4/4, 4-cost 4/4, about par, and it has the advantage of being split into 2 minions, so if it matches up against another zombie, at least you'll have a 2/2 survive. So if this game had arena mode, I would probably rank this higher, but for a 4-cost card, it just doesn't do enough. It doesn't do enough damage. It's too slow. There's such better 4-cost cards in this game than Pair of Pairs. You'll almost never see me do this in a deck unless the deck is literally called I'm Mentally Impaired. It's going in F. Sorry. All right. Here is Pair Paradise. So this is way too expensive for a planned environment. Again, since planned environments can be covered by the last say and their zombie environments even cost 1 or 2 is about standard, This is not a good card to be running in almost any deck. Now, again, this does have some uses like in a deck. If you have to wait till your opponent plays a zombie and does, if they're Rust Bolt or Neptuna and they have 1-cost environments at their disposal. So don't play Paradise until they commit all of their brains on zombies, usually. If they are in Morticia, so they only have 2 costs, so then if they leave 1 extra brain, you can still play Paradise and safe. If you do pull this off, it's really, really good. Again, I will show you the deck with the Dandelion King recopy too. It's an important part of that deck. It's a very fun card to play also with Molecule, because then you transform everything once, and then it creates another Molecule, and the first Molecule turns to a 5-cost card and transforms everything again. So it's kind of just fun. We usually just end up using this in RNG decks. You can play this to start in Strongberry. It's not a very competitive card at all. Because it has solid uses actually in a couple of top tier decks, and it also is a very fun card in a couple of top tier fun decks in the game. It's not completely useless, so I'll stick it in C tier. Oh my gosh. This is... How does this card cost 4? This is such trash. Guys, this is so... I wish the RNG cards just were like Seedling. It was a little better. This is only good if played on a small plant. And again, the same way as Seedling, it usually just turns into another garbage card and draws a card. For 4, like for 2, this would be okay. But you end up conjuring this from things. You end up like random tricks and stuff that you conjure. So freaking bad. You get this from Cosmic Flower. I really, if this card costs 2, it'd be super, super fun. Even in RNG's decks, it just doesn't make the deck fun, because when you play this, you spend 4 sun, burn 4 sun on a garbage piece of idiot card like Petalmorphosis. It's just going right into please delete tier. Oh my gosh. Even if this card costs 3, it would still be garbage. I think 2, it wouldn't be OP at 2. It would just be like, okay, fine, let's give it a whack. That's how bad. How does this cost 4? This is so bad. But anyway, I almost want to, you know what, I'm creating an entirely new tier for Pineclone. This card is underrated, and it's not because people don't think it's a good card. Everyone who has half a PvZ brain in their skull knows that Pineclone is one of the best cards in the game. The reason that this is actually going into its own tier, it's the reason I consider this to be underrated, is because people don't realize that this is like the best plant in the entire game, probably the best card in the entire game. I don't think it's overpowered. I really don't think this needs a nerf. There's really no way to nerf this card. You can't reduce its health or stats or make its cost more. I really don't think this card can be nerfed. Maybe as a 5 it would be okay. It would be okay as a 5. It would kind of ruin the card to make it really nerf it. I don't think it's overpowered. It's so solid, especially with your free cards. You combine this with your Puff Shroom and with Shroom for 2. It just takes all of your little tiny minions and makes them solid. 3 attack and 3 health is the perfect stats for just a decent minion, a decent plant in this game. It does not get easily removed, and it does enough damage to really cause your opponent problems. How many times do you play Pineclone decks where you just end up swarming the field on turn 4 or 5? You can get 5, 6, 7 Pineclones on the field when you're combining with your Shroom for 2s and your Mushroom Grottos and your, we run a Psycho Pineclone deck where you're also running 4 copies of the Lil Buddy, which is another free way of making Pineclones. It's so underrated. It's so good. I almost can't even explain the full extent of this card, rather than it just turns... So it's just the amount of value and the amount of difficult this is to control. It's so great. This is probably, if you want to craft a plant legendary, I would certainly advise you to craft Pineclone. It's just so freaking good. Is it Queen Pineclone because it's she? She just prefers? Fine, I'll turn into Queen, you cisgendered heteronormative. There. Queen freaking Pineclone. Queen of the clan. Sorry. Maybe I'm the heteronormative one. But anyway, transform plants into 3/3. Supernova Garg is not a good answer to Pineclone because, again, you play Pineclone usually on 4. Even if you play this on 5, you can't play Supernova Garg until the next turn, and the damage is already done. And by that time, you can either remove the Supernova Gargly, play Dry with Shamrocket, or whatever big removal card you have, or you can play Molekale and transform all these Pineclones to another thing. Supernova Gargly is not, every once in a while, you'll see a lucky shot where Supernova Gargly answers Pineclone. Generally is not a good answer. Thank you so much, Brandon. It's not weak against Supernova. The only real answer to Pineclone, in my opinion, is Extinction Event. And it almost makes Extinction Event go up a tier just because this is the only really solid answer to Pineclone. Now, if you have a Molekale in your hand, Extinction Event is not an answer because it'll reduce a little bit of the damage you take that turn, but it still will turn they all survive. So it's still going to turn all the Pineclones into 5-cost cards with the Molekale. But if you have an Extinction Event or two, even better, and they don't have that Molekale in your hand, that really does mitigate the entire card. But again, it's so hard to answer. Like Weed Spray is an answer, but people say, oh, I'll tell you what answers Pineclone. It's freaking it's the Hardy card. It's what's it called? It's this one. See, it's a 3-cost card knockout. This does not answer if you're playing Pineclone, right? You're average getting 4. This answers half of a Pineclone. Anyway, keep it going. Pineclone, oh freaking P. All right, here's Sergeant Strongbear. I explained what happened to Berry decks. They've gotten a lot worse. This also used to be a 4-4 to nerf it. It became a 4-3. It doesn't make that much of a difference. There's a little cool thing we can do with Sergeant Strongbear, which is have 2 of them on the field. And then anytime a Berry does damage, they just create a loop. Now, it used to do an infinite loop and would just burst down your opponent's face until they hit 0 health. Very cool. You can find that in my very old YouTube videos. Just look up Sergeant Strongberry loop. Nowadays, that does not happen because once a block happens, it just blocks all of the damage that happens afterwards, so it'll only loop. It's still an okay strategy to get a lot of damage in. Not a super useful card. Can't really say Sergeant Strongberry is part of any top tier deck. I'm just going to put it in C together with Strawberryan because that's basically where it is. Alright. Man, I gotta hurry up. Sonic Bloom. This is a very good finisher. You'll find it as a finisher in Cycle Cap, in Pineclone decks. This is very good because you end up with a lot of minions in the field. Just being able to put that last burst of damage on the field. You can find it in the Dandelion Miracle deck. This is really okay to run in any Swarm deck, even in non-Swarm decks, though. Just an ability to, like, you need there to be a lot of minions on the field, so it is sort of circumstantial in that way. The reason this is better than a lot of the other minions that just combine with like Cro-Magnolia is because this is typically the last card of the game. You just burst them down. Cards that, it doesn't need good stats. It only has 3-1, has horrible stats. It doesn't need any of this. It doesn't rely on statistics and continuity in the game of continuing and surviving to the next turn at all. So that's why you're usually just playing this very late in the game on turn 6 and 7 as a finisher together with your Swarm. Because it's a very solid card in a lot of decks, it's not really a top tier, but I will put this in A tier because it's just a really nice, crunchy, solid card. I find, by the way, that if you're looking for a late game combo, usually Astro Shroom is better because Astro Shroom actually does everything Sonic Bloom does, but it's a 1-cost card. Because think about it, if you're playing a bunch of Shroom for 2s on a turn, a bunch of Pushrooms, and then Sonic Bloom, you might as well just be running Astro Shroom, which costs 3 less. You're able to play a lot more, and it really just does. This will do damage including itself, but it's not Bullseye. This doesn't include itself. It won't do damage when this is played, but it will do 1 damage again for every single guy played afterwards. So different uses, different decks. If you're looking for the late game combo, Astro Shroom is better. We'll put it solid A tier card. Sour Grapes is a really unreliable field clear. Again, this used to be very good when Berry decks were good because then it was reliable. Sergeant Strongberry would buff this by a lot. It would work well with Strawberryan, etc. Nowadays, this is not very. Every once in a while, Sour Grapes will be great. You'll just need those little one. If they have like a lot of damaged minions on the other side of the field, but some Sour Grapes can just wipe them off. I'm not going to say this is a horrible card, but it's almost unusable on the highest level of the game. I would put this in D, but I think since it is a part of Berry decks, which are just okay, and I think for budget players, every once in a while this is fine. This is a card that, especially, like, sometimes when you just conjure this, it's like, hey, this is really useful. Even if this removes 2 minions off the field, you put a 2/2 in front of something, like 2 weakened minions, and it does 1 damage to another one, and then damages a 3rd minion too. It really does give you a decent amount of value, again, against already damaged minions. It's fine. I'll just stick it in C tier. Oh, do we have room in C tier? Okay, let's go. Here's Fig. Here we go. This is almost always just used, not as a competitive card because it's not really reliable, but it is a very, very fun card. This card has ridiculous stats for a 4-drop, 4 cost 4/7. This will basically always trade with whatever zombie you want and survive and turn to a random minion. Again, the problem with cards like Transfiguration is that there's not enough expensive cards in the game. If there were, as they added more sets, they added more 1 and 2 drops. If they would add a whole bunch of really expensive cards to the game just to make the average minion cost more, this would actually be a lot better. Usually, again, this most of the time will turn into a 1, 2, 3 cost card. If it turns to a 3, it's still not bad because it removed a 4/4 off the field, something with 4 health. It can even remove a 4/6 off, a 6 attack 4 health guy off the field and still survive and turn to another minion. Maybe this is a little more competitive than I thought. Usually, like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to control with this. It's a tempo card. Maybe there's a deck where you play this together with the Guardian class and you run like Parrot Cup where you're constantly countering their minions and surviving with some stats on the field. I haven't really ever used this competitively. It is very, very fun though. I think because of how fun this is, you can find a lot of fig decks. Just look them up on YouTube. I'll give this a solid B. All right. Here's Atomic Pomegranate. So this will create... Okay. This in general is a piece of trash garbage. It will die. It only has 2 health. The seedlings are so unreliable. If seedlings had team up, this would actually be a decent card because then the seedlings would have more chance of spawning. But if this has a minion to the right or the left of it, it only creates 1 seedling when it dies. And if there's a zombie to the right of this, it also only creates 1 seedling because that stupid seedling with only 1 health always dies to whatever zombie is in the lane to the right of it when it explodes. Now, there is one deck where I found Atomic Pomegranate is super good, and that's a deck where you don't play any minions until turn 5, and you're actually controlling the opponent, you're using Berry Blast and just removal cards to remove everything they play, and you're really going as a control deck and trying to set up a late game card. And then Atomic Pomegranate is good. I think that is a Spadao. It was called the OK Boomer deck or something like that. It's a Spadao Atomic Pomegranate control, and your finisher will be like Kernel Corn and Walnut Bowling, I believe, were in that deck. It was actually very good in that because, again, if they play a minion, if you need to control one single minion that they've played, you've removed everything they've played off the field, and they play something with 5 health, this will remove a minion plus create 2 more for yourself, which is really good. This is also very good against control decks, like playing this against Control Boogaloo, who's removing all your minions out of the field. On turn 5, he's basically going to need 2 or 3 cards to remove 1 of yours, because if he doesn't remove this, it does 5 damage to face, which is decent. And if he does, he's going to have 2 seedlings. He's going to have to spend more cards removing that. So it really is actually useful in sort of like one type of deck, one style of play. You can find that deck on YouTube, and for that, only that reason, I would typically just put this in F or delete here, but it actually is a very solid use, and I'm sure there's a lot of other Kabloom control decks that it will be useful in. And I'll give it just again, it has that one solid use on the top level of the game, and we'll put that in C tier. Here's Bluesberry. This is a card that's just too expensive for what it does. Again, this really does like 5/3 worth of stats. It does 5 damage, 3 health. It has its ability. The ability is useful. Typically, though, if you need a card that's going to do small removal, just run Banana Bomb. The extra 3/3 of stats, it's okay. It's just too expensive. It's not reliable. It's a little bit too late. I think it's a 4-cost card. This could be decent. Tempo in this way, again, you're not necessarily going to get good value out of the 2 damage. They would have to have exactly a guy with 2 health that's worth removing. It's not even that useful in berry decks, so it's not even going to get together with Sergeant Strongberry. I'm going to put this in D tier. I'm not going to say it's horrible. I think for every once in a while, Bluesberry is super, super good. Every once in a while, you'll transform a Pineclone into a Mollycow, but all right, I got to keep it going here. Electric Blueberry. This card, all in all, is not very useful. It's too expensive for what it does. It gets removed too easily by Rolling Stone Flick and Weed Spray. It has too many weaknesses. This also dies very easily to deadly minions. This ability says after combat here, this does 6 damage to a random zombie or a zombie hero. If this happened before combat, so at least you'd get some value out of this if this died to if this was fronted, let's say, confronted by a 5 attack minion or a deadly minion, that would make it good. Now it's after, it's just too unreliable, it's too inexpensive, and also, like, what deck is this good? And what this isn't a finisher, it's not a particularly good tempo card unless you invest a lot into controlling it, in which case it'll probably just get removed anyway at a 5 cost card. Because this doesn't really fit with the strategies of basically any deck in the game, it doesn't combine, every card needs to be contributing towards a win condition, and it's almost impossible to find a win condition that involves Electric Blueberry. I'm not going to put it in F, I'm not going to say completely useless, but we'll put it in D. Keep it going. I got 5 minutes to finish this up. Gloom Shroom. This is only useful in a very limited amount of decks. Now, 5 cost 5/5 Bullseye for a plant, not for a zombie, but for a plant is actually good, because again, the zombies, they're going to have to leave over a lot of brains in order to be able to remove this. If they committed a zombie, you can usually put Gloom Shroom on the field. We did use this in like the 10-0 non-Briar Rose challenge. It worked well. Its ability obviously only works with mushrooms. Ability is strong though. Again, doing 3 damage to potentially 3 minions can really clear your opponent's field. It's just all in all a very decent card. I'm not going to say it's top tier, since its ability only works in mushrooms, and without its ability, it's just kind of meh for a 5 cost card. I'll put it a solid B tier. I think that'll be fine. Alright. Lava Guava. This card is way too expensive. Again, 2 damage to splash is fine. It also creates environments that covers an opponent's environment. It's just too circumstantial. Usually on turn 5, you're trying to win the game. And if they play a big guy on turn 5, this is going to do nothing to it. It's going to have way more than just 2 or 3 health. Every once in a while, Lava Guava is amazing, but it's usually garbage, and I'm going to put that in D tier. Oh my gosh, this card. Sizzle is... This is such a bad card. Now, I think if cards like Shamrocket and Squash were more expensive, just compare this to Squash. It just removes any zombie just cold off the field. This doesn't remove most cards that cost 5 or more. This can only control cards that cost 3 or 4. It's so bad. I feel like if this card costs 3, it would be good. Would it be too good for a 3? I think it would be a solid 3 cost card, because then it'll basically remove any 3 cost zombie in the game. Maybe it would be too good at 3, because it'll remove every 3 cost card, and then most 4s. I guess 4 cost would actually be okay for this in a control deck. At 5, it's just completely unplayable, because again, it's just so outclassed by... I don't have to show you guys what Squash. You all know what that does. Or destroy a zombie for 5. The only time that you ever really get this is when you're not running your deck and you and you conjure it, and it's always a really bad idea to conjure. It's just way too expensive for a 5 cost plant, and that's why it is going down the garbage into ew, please no tier. Let's keep it going. Okay, here's Cherry Bomb. This is a little bit too expensive for what it does, in all honesty. I feel like it may be a 5 cost card, so this gives you a lot of value. First of all, the fact it's focused to 3 lanes gives it a lot of problem. If this could do 4 damage, let's say to 3 random zombies, I think that would actually be better, because usually you're not going to have more than 3 zombies on the field. The fact it's only this lane next door means if they spread their zombies to lanes 1 and 4, or 1 and 5, or 2 and 5, it's not going to be able to hit them both. 4 damage also on turn 6 is usually not enough. Usually the zombies are going to have way more health than just 4. If this did a lot more damage, like 6 damage, I feel like then it would be reliable, because then it could be 1 card or remove several. Usually, if they've already swarmed minions on the field on turns 1, 2, and 3, the Cherry Bomb on turn 6 is going to be way too late. This is almost useless. I'm going to put this in D tier, because it's really basically just as useful as these D tier cards. Really not. Even berry decks, you're typically not even running Cherry Bomb berry decks. All right. Quickly, here's Dandelion King. Now, this is going to half their health. In order to really explain the usefulness of this card used to be a lot better. The meta has shifted as they added more cards. This is a premium set, so they added a lot more cheap cards into the game. The games typically go faster. To set up a kill on turn 6, that then you're going to have to come with something on turn 7 is usually too slow. Again, I do have the one Dandelion King Miracle deck. This is amazing. This is also really good against control decks like Control Boogaloo. If you play Dandelion King, it doesn't matter, you can control this. You just have their health, which is not enough health for, let's say, a late game control zombie deck to be able to deal with. This is mostly good in a deck where you haven't played any minion. You're not doing anything for the first 5 turns, and you're really playing this on turn 6. You can combine this with Imitator or with Paradise to actually do 15 damage instead of 10. Because this really does have some good uses, but it's useful only in very, very few decks, I'll put it in B tier. Again, I'd like you guys all to check out the Dandelion King Miracle deck on YouTube. Poison Oak is just a stat card for 6. It's not even a very good one. It does 9, which is one of the strongest plants in the entire game. So if they happen to commit a lot of brains into a zombie on turn 6, this will always do more damage than it. But at the end of the day, it's unreliable. It dies too much to rocket science and hard removal, and even teleporting a minion in front of this really just negates it. And to teleport on turn 6, to teleport a 5/5, which will trade easily with this, is very easy for zombies to do, so it's usually not a good trade. It's almost completely useless in every deck. I'll put it D just because it might be a good finisher for budget players. I'm not going to say it's completely useless, but again, it is a plant, so if they commit a 6-cost zombie, go ahead and put this in their face. You're going to have their health basically in half. Alright, let's go. Here's Grapes of Wrath. This card, I used to like running Dandelion King on 6 and then Grapes of Wrath on 7. Again, I feel like that used to be a better strategy, but nowadays it's just too slow. Typically, Grapes of Wrath, first of all, this doesn't necessarily finish off the opponent because they're not necessarily going to have a minion on the field that does 6 damage. So they can very often just, teleport a little minion in front of this. You're not necessarily going to have an open lane. If they'll have a lot of lanes clogged, you'll have to try to stick this in an empty lane. Just for a 7-cost card, I think in general this does not do enough. I don't think it's even as good as, nowadays, as good as Dandelion King, so should I put this in C or D? I really don't think this is very good. Again, playing this on the field and doom shrooming yourself, I don't think is a very good idea. If the guys can please stop copy pasting, what the heck is this? Oh my gosh, what the hell? Anyways, people are spamming the chats, okay. I'm gonna put it in D tier. It's about the same as Poison Oak. And finally, we have Colonel Corn. This is actually a very reliable card. It's a big 6/6 card, puts a lot of stats in the field, and really removes basically everything your opponent has. This will remove mostly everything your opponent has. You usually have one minion survives. That will usually not be as good as a 6/6. That's why this is a very decent finisher. It's not really gonna finish off games, but it's a finisher in the fact that it can very easily swing the entire tempo on the board to your favor. And where the heck did I drop this? I dropped it I dropped it in F tier accidentally. I think this is a nice solid finisher in the game. It's very reliable in almost any control deck. You can also just follow this up and spit out with Walnut Bowling or whatever. But this can actually be the finisher of a deck. It's not like one of the best finishers of the game, but it's a nice solid card. I'll put this in A. But anyway, guys, that was the Kabloom tier list. I hope you guys enjoy it. Again, let me know in the comment section below which list you would like to see me do next, which class. Eventually, I'll do the heroes and maybe some other ideas as well. Hope you guys enjoyed. Peace. This is Fry.